So this video is going to be about sketching quadratic curves. So the idea is going to be how curves are transformed from the basic function, which is going to be f of x is equal to x squared. So I'm going to just sketch what that looks like first of all, and then we're going to talk about how different curves can be transformations of that. So in order to do that, I'm just going to show some axes here. And then you should know that x squared is basically just a quadratic function which goes through the origin. So it's a squared curve like that. So because it's a sketch, we don't need to label the axes. We can just write y and x. We don't need to put any quantities on the axes, and then the curve is just going to be squared like that. So what I'm going to do is look at how different curves are transformations of this. So the first thing I want to do is just look at functions which have got a plus or a minus at the end. So say I have f of x and it's equal to x squared plus 2. Now, what I'm doing here, if this function here, I put a number in, I do x squared, and then afterwards I add 2 to it. So what I'm going to do here is I've already done the function. If I put in, say, 1, so if I start with x is 1, the first thing I would have to do would be to square 1, and then afterwards I would add 2. So because I add 2 after I've done the square function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift in the y direction, because I've already carried out the function, and I'm just going to shift in the y direction plus 2. So my squared function of x squared plus 2, if I just copy that one, and then paste another one, oops, pasted one too many. Okay, like that. Then let me edit that and make that blue. So that was where it would have been there. And then because I'm adding 2, what I'm going to do is just shift that 2 up the axes like that. Okay, so it would just be shifted vertically upwards by 2. So one thing you can do when you're sketching curves is you don't need to put numbers on, but if there's a specific point that you know, you can mark that on. So I can mark that there as 2, because I know I've shifted it vertically by 2, because I've got here this function and then plus 2. So because I've done it after the function, plus 2, it's going to shift it in the y direction, and plus 2 means it's going to go up 2. If I had another function, do it a different color, let's do this one yellow. So say I have f of x is equal to x squared and then minus 6. That is going to look very similar if I paste on again. So there is my original curve there like that. Let me just change that color to make that yellow. And then in this case, it is going to shift it downwards because I've done my x squared function, and then instead of adding on, like I did here, went plus 2 and went upwards, here I've got minus 6, so I'm just going to shift it downwards. So my curve is going to transform and then translate downwards down here like that. And then that point of intersection here is going to be at negative 6. So that's the first idea there. So when I've got my original function, f of x, which is x squared, which is this one, if I have a number after that, if it's positive, I'm going to shift it up by 2, in this case because it's plus 2, and then because it's negative here, the yellow one is going to be shifted down by 6 and minus 6. So any change after the function, positive or negative, is just going to shift it up or down in the y direction, positive numbers being upwards, negative numbers being downwards. Okay, so next I'm going to look at transformations, which will be when you do something to the function beforehand. So functions sort of like this, where f of x is equal to and then x plus 2 all squared, like that. Now in the case of this function, what I do here is the first thing, because this is inside the brackets, I have to take my x. The first thing I have to do is add 2 to it, and then I square it afterwards. So since the function was x squared, and what I've done here is I've added 2 to x before I've run it through the function. So because I've done x plus 2 first, and then afterwards I've done the squared, this is going to be a translation in the x direction, because I'm doing something to the x first, and then afterwards I'm finding out the value. So what I'm going to do here is, again, it's just going to be a translation of this curve, the x squared. However, this time it's going to be in the x direction, and it's going to be the opposite way to the way you think. So because I have to add 2 to x, I'm going to start off at -2. So x being -2, and then I add 2 would take me back to the 0, which is what I had originally. So mapping it onto this curve, I would have to shift it this way. So my blue curve should be shifted over to the left here. So again, I'm just going to copy that. Paste it in, a new one. So let's just move it on top and change the color, make it blue. So then it should just be a translation by moving it over to the left 2 squares like that. Now in this case, the point of intersection here, whereas in this one it would have intersected at 0, this one is going to be a -2. I'll actually just move that slightly downwards and just fix that. There, so it should be like so. So in this case, because I'm doing the +2 to the x before I do the squared, so basically before I do the original function, this is a shift in the x direction, and because what I need to do is think about what I would need to do to get back to 0. So the value here, the intersection with the x-axis, was when x is 0. So this will be at -2, because when I add 2, I would get back to 0. If I just do another one, so do here f of x is equal to x minus 3 squared. In this case, to get back to 0, if x was 3, I would do 3 take away 3, and that would bring me back to 0. So this one will be a translation in the x direction, and it would have translated it this way. So x would be 3, would bring me back again to this green curve. So if I paste on another one again, move that up to there, that's like that, change that to be yellow. Why didn't that change to be yellow? And then shift it, it did change to be yellow. And then bring it over here. Alright, looks like I've selected both of them there. Let me bring that one back again. Okay, so it should be like that. And this point here would be at 3. So because I'm doing changes to the function before, or changes to the value of x before it runs through the function, so the +2 here would shift it 2 to the left, and the -3 here would shift it 3 to the right. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about stretches. So if we have a function f of x is equal to, say, 4x squared. Okay, now in this case, what I'm doing is I'm multiplying my function by a factor of 4. So there's going to be a transformation of this green curve, the x squared, and multiply it by 4. So what I would basically do is take my values from here and I would multiply them by 4, which means that my curve would end up getting stretched in the y direction. So it would end up being much, much taller and thinner than it was previously. So I'm just going to redraw what it would look like. It's going to end up looking something like that. So it's not translated, it's not shifted left or right. It's just that every value that would have been for the green one is going to be 4 times larger. So the curve is going to get stretched right out. If you think about it, when x was, say, 1, here it would be 1, whereas on the blue one it would be 4. So it would be the same thing 4 times higher. So you don't need to put details, you have to put numbers on, just intersection points, but the idea is that the curve would be much, much thinner and much, much taller. So we get a stretch like so. Okay, so let's try putting everything together. What I want to do here is produce a sketch for this function f of x is 2 lots of, and then bracket x minus 2 all squared plus 1. So this is my reference curve again for y is equal to x squared, or f of x is equal to x squared. Okay, and then what I want to do is look at these things one by one. So the first thing is I've got this 2 here, so I know that my quadratic is going to get stretched in the y direction by a factor of 2. So let's start by drawing a curve which looks like that. So something like that. So this 2 here is going to produce the stretch, which makes it twice as much. Then I can look at these 2, which are translations. So this minus 2 means it should shift 2 to the right, sort of like that. And then this plus 1 means it should shift up 1, sort of like that. So then this vertex here, just move it down there a little bit, like that. Okay, so this vertex here then should be, this point should be at 2 here, and then 1 here on the y-axis. Okay, so to work out the vertex of my curve, it is from the translation, it's shifted 2 to the right and then 1 up. So it's 2 to the right and then 1 up. So that's the vertex for my curve, and then my curve should be steeper than the original reference curve because it's being multiplied by this factor of 2 here. Okay, so I just want to do one more example. So this one says it's going to sketch the curve y is equal to 6 minus x squared. So the first thing I want to do is just write that slightly differently. So I'm going to write that as y is equal to minus x squared plus 6. Now, hopefully we can see that we're going to have a minus factor on the x squared here, and then a translation plus 6 to shift it up. So here's my reference curve here. Now, if I multiply this by a negative number, I'm basically going to multiply by negative 1. So every positive value for x here will now become negative. So by having a negative, what that's going to do is that's going to flip the curve over. So there is that. Let me change the color of that again. Okay. And then by having it like that, it's basically going to be inverted. So my curve is going to be upside down like that. All right, so that's going to be the position for the minus x squared there. And then because it's plus 6, I'm going to need to move it up 6. So it would be sort of like that, and then crossing at 6 here. So that point there would be 6. And if I wanted the equations for the vertex of this yellow curve now would be 0 and 6. So it's going to be upside down because of this minus here. Means that I'm multiplying every value for the original curve by minus 1. So that's going to flip it upside down, and then I'm going to translate it up 6. So it's going to be like that. So in this case here, the best thing to do is to rewrite it so it looks like something to do with x squared and then plus or minus something.